Okay, yeah, maybe first of all, I will make a short introduction of myself. So as you said,
Please.
my name is Oliver Kothrade. I'm turning off to be 50 this year, and I'm now working for Panasonic also 1st of July, 20 years. So I'm the HR director looking after consumer electronics in Europe. And also I studied from university in labor law and also HR management. So really my profession is HR management. So this is really in my DNA. And yeah, so how I become familiar with the standards. So really we have to go back in time in 2011. And then there was a small article, I think in one of the magazine from the Dean. And the Dean is the Mirror Committee in Germany, who is responsible for setting, let's say, national guidelines, but also being involved in the global guideline setting. So with ISO, and they are doing some kind of recruitment. So they are asking for volunteers because they had the request that coming from the US, there is some new project starting up in developing HR standards. And I read this article, and then I have a phone call with the secretary, and then I went to Berlin for the first meeting back to 2011. And since then, I'm a member of the German Mirror Committee, and I'm also the co-chair of the local community. And also since then, so I have also traveled around the world, because as you know, every year we have a plenary meeting all over the world, meeting really fantastic other HR professionals. And this is what we really like, having really the network, really having this diversity of the group, learning from each other. So this is not only, let's say, holiday, it's because you are learning also other parts of the world, but also this kind of experience. So what their understanding of HR is, what their projects are they are currently working on. This is always very interesting. And then really working together as a, let's say, local and global community on these standards is really fantastic, because you are getting so different views, perspectives, ideas, and then really sitting together in small groups with colleagues from Australia, from Malaysia, from Canada, from UK. So many different countries are participating, and then really sitting together and putting all the ideas together to write on global standards. So this is really amazing work, I think, what we are doing.
Very I mean, we've got a lot of sort of long-term advocates in this group, but certainly going back, you're one of the earliest, which is wonderful. And thank you for your contribution so far. How did human capital management impact? How did you get involved with this group?
Yeah, so this was also, let's say, when we set up the different working groups at that time. So one was the human capital, because, and this was also led by the, let's say, German dean, so Stephanie Becker. So she was the chairman of this group, and of course, we need some other colleagues from Germany also supporting her in getting these things done. So therefore, I joined also her working group, in group 2, where we worked on these human capital reporting. And also, in addition, I'm also involved in this further matrix, because I think the human capital reporting at the time does only gives the overarching framework, but not really giving the details to all the matrix. So therefore, it really falls together regarding the global standards and also then the matrix, which have been also developed over the recent years.
Yeah. And so our discussion topic, we've had sort of a prearranged topic with all of the guests so far, but we keep, the discussion, and you wanted to talk about getting involved with standards in general. And we've asked most of the speakers so far their thoughts on standards in general. So maybe we can take a bit of a deeper dive with you today. And, maybe just sort of one of the common questions that I've come across over the years in my involvement with this standard is how do you standardize work, and in particular people's workplace behaviors and outcomes? How can that, if anything, should not be sort of subject to standardization, it would be the human condition. How do you address that as it relates to this project and its goals?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think it is really important to have some kind of standardization and a common understanding in HR, because as I said before, I'm working for a global company and also responsible for other European countries. and we always face difficulties when certain things or KPIs are not standardized. For example, if I would ask the different HR people in European countries regarding their HR reporting, you always get different figures, because we have not the same understanding, maybe different interpretations. So therefore, it's really important that we have the same terminology of HR language, and that we also get some kind of consensus and agreement. So what are the KPIs? So what is really the definition? Because otherwise all the data are not really matching. So I'm really coming from the, let's say, operational and side, and therefore it's really important so that we have all the same understanding regarding the matrix, human capital, and how to calculate, so that there is no misunderstanding. And I think this becomes more and more important as many companies are also becoming more and more multi-international or even globally. So I think we need to speak a common language also in HR. Therefore, we need this overarching, let's say, human capital reporting regarding so what to report in HR and how to report. And it's very important.
Well, and think of other professions, medicine and law, and just sort of anecdotally, where do we learn our Latin words today? Is from the legacy of the common language of these other professions that they've held on to. And so, there's a bit of a case study as to how professions and the technical expertise with the profession holds on to this. And I think a lot of people that work in or around HR think that HR has its generally accepted standards. But I saw a statistic several years ago that it's just one source, but something like 90% of people who work in HR are focused on domestic operations. So you mentioned sort of your experience working internationally, Panasonic. Actually, I was at the Panasonic headquarters many years ago when I lived in Japan. I lived in Osaka, and so Panasonic's probably the most famous Osaka company, if I'm not mistaken. And so this idea of sort of the standardization of HR practices, can you share with us, maybe a case study or a story that demonstrates from your personal experience the value of having standards?
So my example would be regarding recruitment, because also we're getting the experience that currently the labor market becomes really tougher and tougher also in Europe, especially also in Germany, because the unemployment rate is really going towards zero, really for professionals. So it's not so easy to find capable employees at the moment, and therefore we have to prove bringing our value to the internal departments. If you look to quality of hire and also cost per hire, so this becomes more and more important that we are also measuring this, and when we find some discrepancies, so how we can improve the situation to get better KPIs for recruitment. And so therefore this is one thing also we established in our company, to have a more look regarding the KPIs on the recruitment partner.
Fair enough. Yeah. And when you've been working in this from an international perspective for many years, what were some of the insights that you gained, how practices in HR perhaps being done differently outside of Germany or, outside of Europe, that were both insightful for you, but also helped you understand or reinforce the importance of standardization?
There was some breaking, Brett. Maybe you can repeat.
Sure. So I was saying that in the project, the TC260, you're dealing with a lot of different international perspectives. And given your years on that committee, what are some of the international practices that demonstrate, from your point of view, the value of standardization? In other words, maybe it wasn't common in Germany, but it was common, or other people represented it more common elsewhere. And, what were those practices or vocabulary or other things that would benefit from standardization?
Yeah, so at least what I would say for my learning, so all the subject or related to compliance and ethics. So maybe this is not so popular in Germany, for example. So maybe it's more in the US. We see ethics, for example, they really have these multicultural workforce more important than in Germany. So therefore it was really good to really discuss the different matrix and really understand also different perspectives from other colleagues from other countries and working for other companies, because everyone has a really different perspective. So what is important for its own company?
Here's a very German specific question I'll give you is works councils. How did you explain works councils to other parts of the world, you know, in terms of, and how did you attempt to standardize the discussion relating to that?
Yeah. So I think if you are dealing with works council, there are always two perspectives. So for me, they are really partners, because when you're working in a company, you can only be successful if you have also a good relationship and good collaboration with the works councils in the organization. So all my aim is to really have a good communication collaboration, because in Germany especially, we really have a high bar of codetermination. So as soon as the management decides something, we need to get involvement. Sometimes even we get to have codetermination by the works council. So therefore, to have a good relationship is very important. Also, when it comes to measurements, because measurements is always some kind of performance measurement or how they behave, and therefore you need also to have some kind of consensus also from the works council that we as a company are allowed to do a certain matrix, for example.
Yeah, it's I think from my experience, it's the almost philosophical differences in the world of work are issues like this, because you mentioned such an important keyword, codetermination. And I know from developing study material and content targeting the United States market that there's often a footnote whenever work councils are brought in from a legal point of view, because from different points of view legally in the United States, they not recognize codetermination as sort of a natural market condition that legally can function. And yet, you know, from your point of view, I don't mean you personally, but, you know, from a German point of view and many other parts of the world, you know, when you can get the workforce and the management to align, well, isn't that what we're talking about when we talk about things like HR and productivity and work-life balance and all these other tangible and intangible factors of work? Coming back to the TC260, you know, if you look at sort of the difference between, say, two developed markets like Europe and the United States, or, you know, places like Japan, Korea, Australia, how also in terms of the TC, and maybe if you have examples to share, but when you're dealing with emerging markets and developed markets, you know, one of the challenges in terms of, and you could think of things like the Paris Accord for climate, where some markets will say some, and I don't want to go in that direction, but I'm saying workplace point of view, often the polarizing factor can be related to the maturity of the local economy. Are there any examples of that difference in that gap that you experience that demonstrate, again, the value add of standardization?
Yeah, for me, all we are working on currently is also regarding engagement. So, and I think if you have some kind of maturement of an organization, so of course, then you are looking always to how you can improve the productivity of your workforce. And then the topics come up regarding enablement and engagement of your workforce. And therefore also these standards give some good ideas regarding so how to engage your workforce. So, and I think this is really when it comes to a later stage. So if a country, maybe an organization has some more development, so they are looking more to this issue. But if you're really coming from let's say, emerging countries, maybe they have a different focus. Then maybe this is, first of all, recruitment, how to organize the organization, having health and safety. So I think they have different aspects. I agree, you are. So it really depends on the maturement of the company. Yeah.
Sure. And for those people who maybe are new to becoming aware of this technical committee, this movement, maybe, you know, the ESG kind of alignment, how can people find out more about TC260, about standards, and about becoming involved?
Yeah, so I think at the moment, I think we are doing a lot. I think so. At least, so if I look in Germany, so I think we really have some volunteers really promoting human capital. Also, let's say DAX companies in Germany. So I think there is always some good examples, so that we really are moving in the right direction at the moment. But I agree. So I think we would also need more trainings also for HR professionals. So when I take Germany, for example, because also we HR organizations in Germany, but they are not doing or conducting some kind of certification for HR professionals to have a better and deeper understanding regarding the human capital reporting. So I think we would need more training, like, for example, Zayed is doing in Pakistan with his initiatives regarding HR a matrix, and I think this also maybe needs to somehow transfer also to the other countries over the time, that we are really delivering and providing this kind of training regarding the ISO standards from TC260, and then especially also regarding human capital and the matrix behind.
Well, let's elaborate on that, you know, from your point of view. And again, this is uncharted territory in a sense. It's a bit blue ocean, greenfield, but how do you envision these standards being applied in either learning experiences or assessments of competence and capability? You know, how do you see us integrating this into that professional development ecosystem?
Yeah. So I would say, from my perspective, I think there's still a way to go. So I think we are still in the beginning. So if I also have contact in my HR community with HR controllers who are normally really calculating these matrix, for example, maybe they have a snapshot of ideas of what kind of matrix would be important. But really, if you're looking to our standard, where we have really 11 different categories and nearly 60 matrix. So this is often not known also by HR controllers who are making this kind of reporting for management. Because I think this is not really, let's say, common and known at the moment, at least in Germany, where I have an eye of. And I think this really depends on that we have not really the right training courses which are now offered in Germany to really tackle this maybe in the same way what Zayed is doing in Pakistan. So really to offer some more qualified program.
And how about, you know, in the pipeline, you know, if we talk about some, you know, I think the one standard that's getting the most attention globally right now is the one we're talking about, 30414, human capital reporting, everything related to that. But what about the ecosystem around that? You know, other people who may not be as enticed by the idea of human capital reporting. Can you share with us some of the things that are in the pipeline of TC260?
Yeah, so I think what we have currently is that also the matrix we provided, and also, let's say, the general standard of human capital reporting. So we are now really collecting and get a lot of experience regarding the standard. Because when we made the standard, it was really also based on a green field, and then we put all our experience together, and then we are saying, okay, this is now the standard. But now we have also to prove that this standard is also accepted by the market. And I think we will get some comments. How user-friendly this is, our matrix, is it really clear, or is it still some room for interpretation? Can we do it this way or the other way? So I think also over the time, we have also better procurement also for this standard, because it will also become better. And I think what is important now is that we are also collecting the feedback from the market. So from companies, from HR professionals, maybe also from the investors, so what we can improve also in the future to really make our standard better and better. And therefore we need a lot of input and involvement from different stakeholders. I think this will become more and more important.
And how do you see the profession of HR changing as a result of these standards? You know, one of the things I look back 10 years ago and sort of looked at the different geographic distinctions. You know, we mentioned works count, for example. How do you see these standards changing the actual practice of HR and specifically the type of person who may be effective in a role in HR?
Yeah, so I think it will change the HR community and world, because I think also senior management, they will become aware regarding these standards and these HR matrix, and always they are also asking for some KPIs, and I think also HR needs to explain so their need for existence, and this I think the best we can do by adding added value the company, and this also needs some kind of measurement regarding our work we are doing. So I think it will also come from senior management, that they are saying, okay, you're doing HR, okay, some recruitment, some training, some development, but please prove. So what is really the company success you are bringing into my organization? And then I think we need to prove it. And then we need a, let's say, common terminology, how to measure and how to present to the board.
For sure. How about the question, and not to put you on the spot, but you are an expert, so maybe to put you on the spot. A lot of the things we've discussed so far, I think if someone intellectually aligns with, it makes sense for large organizations, perhaps with international operations. And I think on the international side, increasingly organizations are, whether they like it or not, entering international competition in whatever they do, including even to a certain extent governments. You know, citizen stakeholders are becoming more aware of different practices in different markets. But how about the question where someone would say, and it relates to a statistic, again, I saw a while back, that, you know, the vast majority of people who work in HR are a department of one globally. And so how do we make the case, what we're describing and talking about today, to that department of one? How would you?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think I would give, let's say, these one HR department this kind of guideline. So how to set up maybe HR organizations. So what is really the key focus? So what kind of KPIs coming from the human capital reporting are really important for you? I think at least if you really have a small organization, not so many people in HR working, so by providing this overarching framework and the calculation, giving some kind of certain technology, so how to define, I think this would be a big help for them also to arrange their daily activities.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I'm hearing, what you're saying too, is, you know, you think about people who work in HR today, and, you know, one of the most common backgrounds they share is that they say, well, they fell into it. Like it wasn't something they studied in school or, you know, started out in their career. And if I hear what you're saying too, part of what this does is add guidance early on where people have a reference to help them accelerate their learning curve, whether they're in a large organization or a small organization. Is that fair?
Yeah, fair comment, because if I also remember back to my university, I can't remember that we also have some kind of lectures really discussing regarding so what is really important to in HR. And I think now these times really have changed, because we will ask by our stakeholders, by our senior management, so what is your contribution to the company's success? And therefore you have to provide some data, some figures. So you could not only say, okay, I have done this training or maybe some recruitment. So you really have to provide evidence, and this becomes more and more important.
Well, that shift of mindset is so important. And, you know, I think a lot like yourself, we have more of a background in HR than a lot of other people who work in HR. But I even remember back after graduating from university and in my early career, and I had I worked for a Japanese company, my second job, and he asked me, what I felt was the purpose, the role of HR in the organization. And as a young, fresh graduate, my answer at that time was to sort of protect the organization, like a risk manager, but only on one side of the risk. And and he kind of smiled at me and said, you've got a lot to learn, and to his credit, I know where he was referring to in terms of adding value. It's not just a reactive posturing. And yet to add that value, there has to be some understanding of, what are the goals and objectives of the organization, of the HR organization, and sort of that proactive mindset. So how would you address sort of a question that some people might have about the stereotype of standards? Is that they add bureaucracy, that they're retroactive or lagging indicators? The last thing that we need is more sort of measuring for the sake of measuring, compliance for the sake of compliance. How do you address that sort of inertia?
Yeah, maybe first of all, coming back to your point. So when you started your career, and I think nowadays the role of HR really has changed. So HR is really, let's say, part of the business. It should also sit together with the senior management when a company is making a decision. And therefore, it's really important that you have also some kind of structured approach to how would like to measure the HR activities. And of course, so if you're not so familiar and if you're reading the standard, maybe you find it a little bit boring, maybe a little bit too technocratic. But on the other hand, so if you maybe read it a second time, I think it becomes more clear. So what to measure, how to measure, I think it gives a good guidance. But I can also understood, at least in Germany, there's also coming some pushback regarding the guidelines, especially for mid-sized companies. They're saying, as you said before, maybe there's only one person in HR, so how much would it cost to really implement this kind of standard in matrix? But I think it's not really necessary to cover all. So I think each company should really look, okay, what is important? And then you should have a look into the human capital reporting and pick up these metrics which are really important for your business. So if you are in a production, for example, then workforce availability is a key. So and also maybe cost is a key, because you have a big workforce. So I think it really depends on the nature of business, and then as a starting point, you can really pick up from the general human capital standard what really supports your HR function.
Yeah, very well said. And I think back to my practitioner career, and there was one occasion where I was trying to institute a change of mindset in the leadership team, and I was, Department of One HR, and I was trying to think, how can I change? I'm outvoted here from the CEO and the CFO, and it hit me. I need to prove it to them, and I need to prove it objectively, and used some metrics for the issue, and I made the business case on their terms, not my terms. And again, I think one of the things that a lot of people working in HR don't realize until they do it, that sort of eureka, that aha moment, the power that comes from taking your person out of it and saying, look, this isn't about me personally. This is about my profession. And the guidance that comes from professional practice, I'm going to use the evidence to demonstrate and make a business case on your terms, which I believe will be better for the organization as a whole and its objectives. And when you do that, it is so powerful. Instead of all these other noise, and don't get me wrong, we're human beings. The politics and other things come into the workplace. But that's, I think, where one of the strengths of some other types of work, whether that's the operations side, whether that's the finance side, have been able to sort of do a better job than HR has historically. And the reason I'm giving this story is, to your point, you don't have to use them all, right? use a couple. Use the ones that you feel would serve a purpose in your organization towards certain objectives, and just use it almost like a sampler.
Yes.
And you get the consistency that comes from the standard itself. So it's not you inventing a metric. And then if you're, going in the right direction, you should be able to make that business case.
Yeah.
So we're coming down to sort of the last few minutes of our time together. I wanted to give you a chance to sort of share your vision of, how maybe a year or two from now, it doesn't have to be limited to sort of just the standards in general, but how the world of work will be different because of what's happening today as it relates to more adoption of ISO standards.
I think what will be changed, let's say, in our working environment for sure is, let's say, after COVID, because more and more people will work from home. So this is, let's say, our experience. And this is also very, let's say, news we got from the German government, because we talked earlier regarding the codetermination. And now they also put a different or another chapter in the codetermination book in Germany, saying, okay, whenever you would like to organize working from home for employees, this will become codetermined. So also then need to sit together with the Works Council and getting some kind of agreement. So how we will organize the work from home in the future. And in my experience at the moment, there's so many people, also Panasonic, can really work from home. But now also they are asking, or do I need to sit in Germany? Why could I work from Spain or maybe from other European countries? And then this becomes much more problematic and more challenging, because we have different income tax systems, social security systems in Europe. So this will not so easy, but I think also over the time this will be changed. So because I think the place and time of bringing your contribution to the company, so this will change in the future more and more. So we will have more, let's say, remote teams, ad hoc teams. So there will be really a change in our, let's say, working environment.
It's such, I love that example. And part of what I love about the example is, to a certain extent, it relates to understanding work markets, workforces, jobs in other parts of the world, not necessarily related to this ISO standard, but the actual development of a universal standard in the workplace has to work everywhere by definition. It can't be specific to only one market or geography. And I think of how much I learned as a Canadian studying the American work environment. And I remember many years ago when in Canada there was still a mandatory retirement age. And I studied American HR and American laws that said, well, that's a form of discrimination called age discrimination. And so the more you look at different markets, you can get not just a sense even for the organization that you work for about practices that can be applied in different ways, but it helps you think outside of the box. And that's probably something that a lot of people who frame standards as thinking inside the box. In order for you to come to a codetermined consensus with your colleagues in the rest of Europe and North America and Asia and other parts of the world, you actually have to understand their frame of reference as much as your own frame of reference. And I think that's, again, something that a lot of people don't think about as a benefit of the consequence of engaging in the development of standards. So final thoughts, Oliver, any last words of wisdom to our audience?
Yeah, so I would say that we are really on a good track. So really looking back to 2000 when our journey starts. So now we are, let's say, 10 years later. And I think what we accomplished over the last 10 years is really a lot, because we have to see that we are doing all these work in global standardization really on our free time. So I'm getting not paid by Panasonic, and I think no one else get paid the company. So this is really on a voluntary base, and because I think we feel it all like a mission. So we would like to make the HR community or world a better place, maybe more consistent, giving us some framework, some policies. So I think we are really on a good way, and still a lot of work needs to be done. And I think what is also really important when we go in the revision of these standards we developed on the first time, because maybe it was really theory based and not really maybe reflecting all the different issues are now coming up from a practical perspective. I think we will become also better, and also when we will have a revised version for our human capital reporting standard, I think it will further improved. And what we all learn outside is that also global organizations are asking for standards, and this is not really a standard maybe developed on a local level, maybe by a small group, because ISOs, they are really, let's say, known, and they have a good reputation, and everybody is following these kind of standards. So, and I think we need to bring HR standards, let's say, more into this global organization, and it's like a domino. So if you have really the first companies starting with, then you will have a lot of followers, and then you will get a lot of feedback from others, and then you can really work on to make our standards here even better for the future.
Yeah, such a good summary. And you again reminded me of one of the discussion points we had many years ago when we started this project. If you will, they come. And I think what I hear in your voice and your examples is we're feeling that people are knocking at the door. That's very exciting. And so again, thank you for your contributions tonight to this session, to the ISO Standards Project. And on behalf of my colleague Fahad here in Dubai and myself, Oliver, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Brett. Thank you.